Bill, what motivated you to build a net zero home? And how has living in one kind of shaped your perspective on sustainability?
One of the things was I knew too much. All right, let's phrase it another way. I learned a lot of and we had always purchased existing homes. I started a Facebook group, and then I have a web page. They're both Spohn Home. I think my wife and I grew up with parents that were, post World War II era, saving, rationing, being economical about things, reusing things till they wear out. That was just part of the way we grew up. And it was
a lot of people talk about sustainability in today's world, but not many people kind of walk the walk, right? They talk the talk, they don't walk the walk. Well, in this episode, I'm excited to have with me Bill Spohn. Bill's a licensed professional engineer. He is a president, CEO, and owner of TruTech Tools, and he built his own net zero home from scratch because he wanted to walk the walk and not just talk the talk. And so why do we have him on the AEC Leadership Podcast? Because he's leading by example, and he's been a leader in his career. And in this episode, he's going to walk us through the process of building a net zero home, things to look for if you want to do something like that. But not only a home, we talk about AEC projects and how you can think about being more sustainable in the way you deliver projects. Lots of good advice here. It was really exciting to hear his whole journey about how he built this home from scratch and how he monitors everything. I think it's just a good pathway for how we're going to have to think about living moving forward to be more sustainable. I'm Anthony Fasano, and this is the AEC Leadership Podcast. Let's dive in. All right, now I'd like to welcome my guest onto the show for today. Bill Spohn is a licensed professional engineer, president, CEO, and owner of TruTech Tools. Bill, welcome to the AEC Leadership Podcast.
Thank you very much, Anthony. Thanks for the invite. I'm flattered.
Yeah, we're happy to have you here. And I'd love for you to start off by telling our viewers a little bit about yourself. How did you kind of get into the fields of HVAC and building performance, and what led you to co-found TruTech Tools?
So I think I was curious as a young kid about how things worked, which led me to a college degree in mechanical engineering. And then and I feel like I built a career in stages to actually own a business. Now, did I do it consciously or subconsciously? I don't know, semi-consciously, we'll say. But I've worked first in quality control for a large company, Eastman Kodak. I worked in manufacturing engineering for Fisher Scientific and got introduced to instrumentation, and then worked as a design engineer for Bacharach Incorporated. That was my introduction to the HVAC field. And then I worked for a component manufacturer, Superior Valve, for a little while, and then for Testo for 10 years. And that's a European-based test instrument manufacturer, and my focus was HVAC test instruments. So during that time, from Bacharach forward, I always got, knowing intimately how these products worked and how much value they had. I was always really frustrated that more people weren't buying and using them. So I had a colleague at Testo, his name is Jim Bergman. He had shared that same frustration. He was our technical liaison. He was actually an educator. And he was like, we got to do something about this. So he and his dad actually started a business, TruTech Tools, in 2007 to focus on the tools and test instruments, to train people about the applications of using these products. They brought me in because of my business experience to help them for about a year and a half. And then it really took off. And then I joined the company full-time in 2009.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, it's an interesting journey. And, I think as an entrepreneur myself, I know that kind of your network, your expertise, all that matters as you kind of grow in your career. How did your network and expertise kind of grow over the years? And what role did mentorship or industry connections kind of play in your journey to date here?
Sure. I call myself a chronic volunteer, and I'm trying to keep that under control. But I feel like in volunteering, you're learning for free because nobody's really paying you. Maybe you step forward. So my first volunteerism was really, I think Boy Scouts. But then getting into college, I joined ASME, the American Society of Mechanical Engineers, my freshman year. And then just volunteered time and learned things and held an officer position and learned how to run a meeting, learned how to talk to people. And keep a conversation moving. And then I volunteered for technical committees, a lot of technical committees for the industry. And that got me to meet a lot of people and to develop that mentor network, and for people to call on me and for me to call on them to do things. And now with LinkedIn, the last 10 years, that's just exploded in terms of the number of connections that you can make. But a lot of mine were formed from real-time meetings, before the internet was a big thing. And now I've joined, volunteered for a couple different boards for industry associations. And again, seeing things from a different perspective, and then getting people to ask questions I get asked a lot of questions. So I feel like, I'm going to put back out into the continuum my questions too. I feel like I'm enabled to do that because I answer a lot of questions.
Yeah, it's great stuff. And a couple points that I'd like to kind of make off of that is, one, I think what Bill said is really important. Volunteering is like free learning, because I think a lot of people think of it as, I don't have time to do it, which is then saying you don't have time to learn if you put two and two together, which is not a good strategy, I don't think, for your career or life in general. So it is a great learning opportunity. The other thing that I'll say about volunteering from my own experience is it's an awesome leadership opportunity too, because try to lead people that aren't getting paid to do something, right? It's very challenging. There really has to be a strong mission behind what you're trying to accomplish, a strong vision, and you've got to be able to kind of galvanize this group of people to do something just that volunteers, right? It's not like when you're at work and they have to do a job and they're getting measured on it and they're getting performance reviews. It doesn't work that way. So I find that if you can volunteer, it's also not only is it a great way to learn, but it's a great way to lead. And it's a great way to learn about leadership, servant leadership, different areas of how you can really engage with people to get them moving in the same direction. So I think if you're out there, it doesn't matter what level of your career you're at, you should try to volunteer in any way, shape, and form you can. And that could be professionally and that could be personally, right? In your community, in your church, in the local athletics, whatever the case may be. And I think the other word that I like to use when you think about your network is community.
Yeah.
Right.
Wow.
It's important to have a community in life, whether it's, again, at work or whether it's at home. And I think when you create a community for yourself, a lot of these very positive things happen, some of what Bill mentioned. But we need communities in life. If we didn't learn that through this whole COVID pandemic, when people were sitting at home going through a lot of stress and anxiety because they weren't able to connect with people, if the word network scares you, because it scares a lot of engineers, again, maybe think of it more as like you're building a community that you can be a part of. And I found that that's really, really helpful for me to kind of move that forward.
And that's very interesting. You mentioned community, and I smiled there because I also I actually do 3 podcasts now. One of them is for TruTech Tools, my business, and it's called Building HVAC Science. And it's about those applications, going back to kind of the foundational aspects. But the latest one coming out on March 7th is our team went to the AHR Expo, the Air Conditioning, Refrigeration, Heating Expo, 50,000 people there, got exposed to a lot of people and a lot of products. And also just before that was something called the HVAC School Symposium, which is sponsored by the HVACR School. My good friend Brian Orr has created this out of nothing since 2016. And it is a community of free learning, of engagement. And the title of our podcast coming out in 3/7 is, it's about community. So
Wow.
really that strongly resonates with me, especially lately.
That's awesome. No, that sounds like what Brian's doing too, is exactly that community idea that we're talking about, which is great. So, Bill, what motivated you to build a net zero home, and how has living in one kind of shaped your perspective on sustainability? It's something that, everyone talks about today, but I'm interested to learn about it. And, what were some of the key design considerations and performance insights that people can maybe take away from what you're doing?
Sure. I think one of the things was like I knew too much. All right, let's phrase it another way. I learned a lot of and we had always purchased existing homes and never built new. So my wife and I agreed, this would be our first and our last house to build. So we would build it so we could age in place. But we were at that point in our careers and our lives where that made sense to do. When we got a nice plot of land to do it on, 3-acre plot of land. But the net zero aspect really wasn't like a driver. I started a Facebook group, and then I have a web page. They're both Spohn Home. One is I started a Facebook group, and then I have a web page. They're both Spohn Home. My wife and I grew up like with parents that were, post World War II era, and
Sure.
saving, rationing, being economical about things, reusing things till they wear out. That was just part of the way we grew up, and it was like how lightly can we tread going forward with a house design. And just in any case, anyone out there is thinking like, oh, you had materials trucked to site, and there's a built-in carbon, all that. We're doing the best we can.
Right. Right.
Than just ignoring, not ignoring that, recognizing that, embodied carbon and all that. But that's one other thing I think I'll talk about maybe a little bit more later is you have to be able to execute a design. If you don't execute it, you've done nothing. So everything we did had to be executable, which meant compromise. So I think that's an important thing, and maybe that's a different phrase of the conversation here. But we also wanted to, do it for our children, our grandchildren, et cetera, like that. And our goal, originally we thought about building a passive house, but we had a good local friend who was actually a passive house trained technician who pointed out that there's this decreasing return for additional investment in passive house features. And I'm not bashing passive house, but it just didn't work in our budget. And this was 2018 is when we were in the design phases. So we built instead what some people call a pretty good house. And this is a concept from a group of architects up in Maine. They've actually written a book called The Pretty Good House. And we looked at the passive house criteria, the 6 criteria that make a passive house, and tried to use those.
Bill, what is a passive house for those not familiar with the term? Yeah, maybe you just let them know.
So there's a European and a U.S. standard for a passive house. The U.S. standard is the Passive House Institute. And it talks about, I don't have it right in front of me, but there's about actually I do. There's 6 major principles for passive house. Continuous insulation with no thermal bridges. And no is in quotes because there will be thermal bridges. Airtight construction. High performance windows, but that doesn't always mean triple pane, although we did use triple pane windows. Managing solar gain, which includes both receiving solar energy and shading, either exterior or interior shading, using an HRV or an ERV, heat recovery or energy recovery ventilator, and as minimal an HVAC system as you can. So we went about all 6 of those goals and achieved them, maybe not to the exact standard and specification of passive house, but pointed in that direction. Like, for example, the airtight construction. Our house is actually a modular construction built in a factory about 80 miles away from where we live. And because it was built in modules, there weren't all the continuous surfaces available. So there had to be, compromise made. Airtight construction for passive house is 0.6 air changes per hour at a 50 Pascal blower door test number.
Wow.
Ours is 1.1. So I don't consider it a failure, but if you consider the houses we used to live in were 14, 11, 7,
right.
Some state codes are 5, some are 3, and we're at 1, we're doing pretty good. So it was like we're pointing in the right direction.
Yeah. No, I mean, listen, I kind of live by the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule, right? So you're more than 80% of the way. Yeah. So you're doing a lot better than a lot of other people. So I think that's great. And I really like the whole philosophy of, living as much as we can off of what we have. I think we live in a society now where people can click a button and get anything they want, which has created some probably not so great habits for a lot of people, right? Instead of, there's something that we can reuse or call a neighbor or call a friend who's not using something anymore that's sitting there that's useful. I know my wife and I try to do that wherever we can. I mean, my great-grandfather immigrated from Italy, and I found his draft card, and his occupation was a junk dealer.
Oh, wow.
Right? So finding things and reselling them and trying to survive, essentially, which I think, can help to tell you about kind of where you came from and who you are. But I think what you're saying about execution is really important. It's something I've been trying to focus on a lot with our team here at EMI this year, which is basically for anything in your career, anything in life, you should have a plan or a strategy, and then you have to execute on it. Like one without the other doesn't work, right? So usually if you just start to try to execute on something without a plan, it doesn't go very well. But then on the flip side, you could sit there for weeks and come up with this amazing strategy and plan. But like you said, Bill, if it's not something you can execute at the end of the day, like it's not going to be very beneficial. So I think for those of you listening out there, whether you're thinking about, sustainability or other avenues in your career or life, it's great to have a plan. You need a plan, but at the same time, you have to also execute it. So I think you need to keep that in mind when you're creating your plan, something that's executable, and you're not going to get stuck, right? A lot of times as engineers, we get this kind of paralysis because we overanalyze things and we look at things forever and we want to make the perfect house that has, 0.0, leaks in it or whatever the case may be. And it's not always necessary and it's not always easy to move a project forward. So I think that's a big takeaway. I take away from kind of what Bill's talking about in terms of his net zero home project.
And build in some grace too, because not everything's going to work out, for time, for budget, for people, for compromise.
Yeah. And at EMI here, we do lots of project management training and, risk, understanding up front that there's likely going to be some budgetary and schedule. You'll need grace in both of those areas because things are going to come up. And I think that's generally a good approach. So, Bill, what would you say were some of the biggest hurdles in the process, whether technical, financial, logistical? Talk to us about some of the challenges.
Well, one was COVID during the finishing construction stages. The house was built in October of 2019. It was set on the foundation in January of 2020. And right around March is where everything started to lock down for COVID. So that slowed down construction quite a bit. We did have another challenge was finding a well on site. We didn't know that the local water company would not pump 50 more feet up the hill from our neighbor's house to our house. They just said, no way, we're not doing water for you. So we had to find a well in order to occupy. And then the first 2 wells failed. So we couldn't get a certificate of occupancy because the plumbing inspection couldn't get done because we didn't have a well on site. So that was just like a cascading errors. And then the other thing was we thought we could also connect to public sewer. No, there's no public sewer line on the road in front of our house. There's a private line, which the local township guy didn't know about, that a neighbor had put in. We thought was the public line. So we had to cite a septic system, and our county requires that it be designed a certain way with a backup bed and all kinds of things that it was like rolling a dice that we would even just do the construction. So those are unexpected things. And I say also getting things done right. Like I had in mind, again, I knew too much. I work with ResNet, which is the Residential Energy Services Network, which has standards for home energy ratings. And some of the standards include from the North American Insulation Institute, quality of installation of insulation. And we used unfaced fiberglass in a 2x6 by 24-inch center cavities. We had an unfaced fiberglass in the walls of the house. That was the wall insulation. And I went to the factory in a couple trips, and I knew I'd sent them information in advance, but then I went and inspected, always inspect. They had stuffed some insulation there and compressed it all. And it was like, wow. No, that's not going to work. That's not the way it works. So the foreman giving me a tour hopped up on a ladder, fluffed it all out, and he goes, there. And I said, okay, now do it everywhere. Right. Not just that one spot I found. How do I know you didn't do it right elsewhere? Driving me crazy. So I actually hired a local guy to be our energy consultant on the project. He commented on the architectural drawings. He visited the factory. He actually went as far as making a mock-up for the way he wanted the windows installed. He made it in his garage.
That's great.
For the construction, the ceiling, the fastening, everything. He just wanted to have things done right for us. So had to go like the extra mile. And then I started to mention before, having local contractors or businesses or services who will work with your wild ideas. That's really important. And some of my ideas were a little bit wild and out of the box. And that goes back to execution. So you got to blend that terrific ideas, terrific plan with the ability to get it done in your area to execute it, because it's built locally. Homes are built locally for the most part.
Yeah, that's a really good point in terms of when you're building anything, from my experience, is you have to take the time to monitor the construction, right? The installation, and having someone who's an expert like you hired someone, I think is a really smart idea because number one, it's hard for you to see everything yourself, especially if you're doing other things at the same time, right? Because that could really be a full-time job building a house and staying on top of it. And they have the expertise that maybe you don't have in all those areas, like you said, with the mock-up, with the window installation, which I think is great. And I think the one thing you said too about contractors having to be willing to work with you on some of your ideas is an important thing. Just as kind of a more mundane example, here at our office, our EMI headquarters, we have a landscaping service. And in the summer, it got, we had a drought for a while. So I told the landscaper, I said, you got to mow every other week because you're coming every week, but there's nothing to mow,
Right.
And the guy was just inflexible. He's like, we don't do that with our business. We do weekly service. So I got someone else that did every other week.
Wow.
I mean, I think that, you really have to find people that are willing to be flexible with some of the things that are more innovative today or different today, like sustainability is a different, people aren't used to that in a lot of realms. So I do think that's an important part of projects. The other thing I wanted to ask you about, Bill, is, engineers are big on numbers and, key performance indicators. And I know you actively monitor many parameters in your net zero home. Can you share maybe which ones you track and how this data helps to optimize the performance of the building?
Sure. So electrical energy, there's no gas line on site. So that one of the things we just ruled out. We weren't going to bring gas in the property, so we decided to build an all-electric home. So I monitor the solar panel production. There's actually the inverters are actually tied to a website, so I can see how much energy is being produced. That's a curiosity, as well as a practical basis. I did find that one of the inverters kicked out on a false safety alert, and our production dropped. If I hadn't been watching, I wouldn't have seen that drop in production. The installer came out, fixed it, but it was, we bought something that wasn't delivering at that point. I also look at usage by circuit. I have it's called an Emporia View electrical energy monitor, just a terrific system. So I have 16 circuits that are being measured, as well as the overall coming into the house. I also do look occasionally at the net meter, which thankfully we're in Pennsylvania. I live in Pittsburgh. Our local electric company does allow net metering. So if we overgenerate with our solar, it goes back to the grid and it reverses the meter. And our meter has never measured positive. We've always overproduced. So we actually have, I was just talking with my wife this morning about how much we have in our bank of kilowatt hour bank with the utility that we draw from at night. We draw from when it's cloudy. We draw from when, the solar conditions aren't right to be generating from the panels. But sometimes in the summer, we'll generate with all the 44 panels we have now, or 42 panels we have now, we'll generate 3 megawatt hours a month.
Wow.
And we don't use it all because the air conditioning load is really low. And I know that because I monitor the electricity. So I know that our air source heat pump uses a lot of electricity to heat and uses a very low amount to cool.
Because there's no leakage.
Right, because there's no leakage and because we live in a mild climate, and then there's shoulder days. And again, going back to our upbringing, there's a lot of days we just open the windows and the AC is off. The ERV is off because it's all fresh air coming in the windows. So we do a lot of that. And we also, so I mentioned the ERV, that also has in it temperature, humidity, VOCs, particulate, and CO2 sensors.
Wow. There's a lot of data.
Yeah, it's a special unit called the SERV 2, made by Build Equinox in Champaign-Urbana, Illinois. I just got the particulate upgrade, which they're designing. I'm a beta tester. They're designing to use this, what they call their particle defense mode for wildfires and outdoor events, so that the ERV isn't thinking, let's bring in fresh air, and the air isn't fresh. So now it can detect and instead recirculate it and cycle it through the filtration system. We use ours like I have. I'm just going to show real quick here. This is a little desktop CO2 monitor. It's getting high in here. That's a little bit high, 1100. So I'm going to hit the remote switch, and I just turned on the ERV to bring air into, because I talk a lot of hot air comes out of my mouth, a lot of CO2. So,
oh boy, I'd be in trouble.
Yeah. So, I mean, overall in the house, we run the ERV when the CO2 gets up to 800 ppm. But when I get to my office like this, I got to run it because my little room here, my office room, is going high. Also measure radon. There's another monitor. I have a couple monitors. This is one here. So we had a radon problem after we moved in. We're built over coal mines here, literally right over coal mines, maybe about 450 feet down. So the gases pool. They migrate up to the ground through the foundation into the house. And then I also have a weather monitor. It's called a Tempest. It's sitting out on a pole above the garden, and I measure wind, rainfall, temperature, humidity, lightning strikes, and it's a little solar powered thing. My main purpose for that is I'm looking at getting some new micro wind generators, just for fun, for experiment. So I wanted to know like what the wind characteristics were up here on our site.
Bill, did you need to do something for the radon, like treatment of some
Yeah,
sort?
I did. So this energy consultant I had lives in the area, was aware of it, said, let's do what's called radon resistant construction. So let's put a perforated pipe, like a French drain, under the periphery of the slab, the foundation. It's a full basement, like a 11-course basement. And we also needed that because of the footers. We use precast concrete foundation walls. So they needed to have drainage footers on either side. So we tied into one of those drainage footers and ran a pipe up through the house into the outside, the top of the roof, hoping that stack effect would drive radon concentrations out. It did not. Even in spite of like meticulously sealing the basement slab. So we had thought ahead and left room to cut in and install a radon fan. And the radon level dropped from around 31 picocuries per liter. 4 is the EPA recommended max.
Wow.
It dropped from around 31 to 0.4 in about 11 hours once the fan was turned on. Wow. Now, the fan runs continuously, and it consumes 0.5 megawatt a year. And I know that because I measure my electricity. So I'm looking for, maybe I'll look for, if this one dies, I'll look for a more energy efficient fan in the next one I get.
I'm curious if the radon measurement is higher in the basement or not necessarily.
It is, because it's a heavier gas.
Okay.
So when I'm monitoring my office here is just sort of like a double check on things.
Interesting. That's all good stuff. So what are some of the common mistakes that homeowners or contractors make when they're designing these energy efficient HVAC systems from what you've seen?
Well, the HVAC system has to exist within a building, within a shell. By forgetting about the shell and the qualities of the shell, both from air tightness, from first air tightness, insulative value, and then orientation, windows, things like that. And that all boils down to not doing a thorough load calculation. And right now, there's just so many tools out there, even some that work with an iPad, that will allow you to do what ACCA, Air Conditioning Contractors of America, has what's called Manual J, which is a protocol for doing a load calculation on a residential structure to give you the output of what's the size of equipment you'll need, and then you can take it into what size. There's another manual for ducts, system selection, all that kind of thing. So I think forgetting about the shell, not doing a load calculation, and not thinking about the way people are going to use the house, use the building. And then I would say another one is not instructing homeowners how to maintain things. Shutting off a fan or blocking off an outlet or doing their own remodel, or even a contractor remodel, and just ignoring air distribution, blocking off vents, or having vents that terminate in wall cavities, things like that. Those are some of the major things. Couple more I can think of, and we use these principles to design our house. And there's a ASHRAE distinguished lecturer, Robert Bean, who's written a book called Thermal Comfort Principles. It's actually free. It's a download for free. But the big takeaway I got from him was about mean radiant temperature and having the surfaces of the house at temperatures that don't add to or subtract from the heat from your skin, from your body. And it all comes from ASHRAE 55 standard, which is about human comfort, basically. And that also involves things like blowing air on people, having outlets or devices that blow air on people. That usually makes people uncomfortable, which will cause them to then jiggle with the thermostat, which isn't what you're really trying to do. You're trying to get, the air and the surfaces in the space at a neutral temperature so you don't even notice it. That would be the ultimate goal. And I think a lot of times where this goes off track is when people use rules of thumb. And I just say, put those thumbs back where they came from.
That's great. So, Bill, a lot of our listeners are leaders in the AEC industry. They're project managers. How can they and their firms integrate sustainable practices into their projects, while they're also still balancing performance and cost and client expectations?
I think I'm not one of that kind of group of people, so it's hard to say what the constraints are, but I think it's just do your own experiments, make it personal in a small way. Maybe it's a relative's house or your own house. Experiment in a small way with this, or find someone that is experimenting with it, because there's a lot of good and bad content, especially on YouTube. But there's some really good content out there, people that are experimenters and doing these things. And listen to my podcast, Building HVAC Science, where I bring people on to interview them about these kind of things, tickle your imagination and hear something new.
Yeah, that's great. And I think too, it starts with yourself too, like in your company, your footprint.
Yeah.
How are you operating as a company, as an individual in terms of sustainability? Like Bill and I talked about earlier, using what you have, reusing things you have. And a lot of times, the clients are, if you work with municipalities or government agencies, they're trying to also become more sustainable. So if you get an RFP, there may just be requirements in there that your company is going to have to kind of, operate and execute your project within. Mm-hmm. So that's going to force your company to have to learn about certain sustainability or net zero or different climate issues. They'll be listed in there, which is going to force all of us to hopefully learn more and do more. And I think Bill's recommendation of trying things and experimenting things is helpful. And I guess the last thing I can ask you about this, Bill, is any last pieces of advice that you can give our listeners that do want to transition to a more energy efficient lifestyle, right? Whether it's their homes, personal vehicles, and any kind of last pieces of advice there.
I think you need to do your research, and I'm expecting the listeners are generally technical people or technically oriented, and make sure you understand things like building energy consumption, building science. Basically, we'll just say there's some good books out there, and there's also I'm hoping some of your AEC professionals are familiar with the Westford Symposium, Joe Stiebrick's Building Science Summer Camp. Okay. Man, what a great place to be. It's a 3-day set of meetings, great presentations, but most importantly, it's the people you connect with from all over the world. It's a pay event, but it could be like life-changing for AEC professionals for what you learn, who you meet. And again, finding people that are doing their own experiments, not necessarily having to do them yourself, but learn from those kind of things. So, and a part of the understanding, do your research, understand building science, is understand interrelationships between systems. Again, there's nothing perfect. There's always going to be compromise, and that would be both with materials and systems that you have an understanding of how things interrelate. For example, we put in high gain, triple pane high gain windows, and 66% of our fenestration faces directly dead south. And that was done purposefully so we could offset winter heating demand from our air source heat pump by getting solar gain. But in the summertime, and even sometimes in the wintertime, we had to put in interior shades. And that was the interrelationship between that. We have to drop the shades in order to avoid excess solar heat gain in the summer. But also in the wintertime, you got to remember about thermal loss, radiant loss through the windows. We drop the shades in the wintertime at night to retain that heat instead of radiating it back out to the atmosphere. So it's, you got to work with nature. Maybe that's the bottom line.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good way to kind of wrap up on it, and really, understanding it, like you said, getting educated on it so you can make these decisions, and or if you're doing a project, considering, like Bill said, to hiring the right help that really understands things and can help you along the way, because it can save you a lot, but also probably teach you a lot for your next project if you're just getting into this, which I think would be a good approach.
Absolutely.
So once again, he is Bill Spohn. Bill's a licensed professional engineer, president, CEO, and owner of TruTech Tools. The website is TruTechTools.com. You can check out all the different equipment that they have. You can connect with Bill on LinkedIn. Also, he did mention that he has a website about the home, the Net Zero Home, which is Spohn Home, Spohn home.com, where you can kind of keep up with what he's doing there. So Bill, thank you so much for coming on to the AEC Leadership Podcast and telling us about your journey and what you've done. It's really exciting and interesting, and we're glad that you shared it.
Thank you. Really appreciate it, Anthony.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Bill. What he's doing is awesome, to be able to do something like that. Again, he's walking the walk. He's not just talking the talk. He's learned a lot, and I hope the lessons that he shared here are helpful to you in your journey towards a more sustainable career and life. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our podcast here. We put out videos like this on a weekly basis to help engineers become better managers and leaders. I'll see you next week.